Her BMW died on the side of the interstate, smoke pouring from the hood, and a stranger in a beat-up pickup pulled over. What happened next didn't just save her career, it changed two lives forever. If you've ever been helped by a stranger, share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Laura Bennett tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the BMW began to shudder. A thin line of smoke curled from beneath the hood before the engine gave one last sputter and died. The silence that followed was louder than any noise, broken only by the whoosh of cars speeding past on the I-90. She coasted to the shoulder, heart pounding, and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 8:32 a.m. Her presentation to the board of directors was at 9 sharp. That meeting was supposed to be the culmination of months of work. Long nights drafting proposals, endless conversations convincing skeptics that Harborline Motors needed a bold new strategy for attracting talent. If she pulled it off, the funding would change not only the company's future but her own place in it. If she failed, everything she had built these last 5 years could crumble in one humiliating morning. Laura reached for her phone, her hand trembling slightly as she dialed roadside assistance. She listened as the operator explained, almost apologetically, that a tow truck couldn't arrive for at least an hour. Her throat tightened. 1 hour might as well be a lifetime. She leaned back against the leather seat, closing her eyes, fighting back the sting in them. The image of herself, polished, confident, in control, was unraveling in the smoke rising from her car. She tugged at the silk scarf tied neatly around her neck, the one she had chosen to project authority and grace. Now it felt suffocating. She loosened it, exhaling as if the air itself carried disappointment. A calendar alert buzzed from her phone, a cruel reminder that in less than 30 minutes the board would be assembling in the glass-walled conference room downtown, waiting for her. Traffic roared on, indifferent. The morning sun glinted off chrome bumpers as commuters rushed toward their lives, each of them with somewhere to be, someone to impress. Laura sat stranded at the edge of it all, powerless, the chill of the autumn air sneaking in through the cracked window. For a woman who had built her entire career on timing, precision, and preparation, the irony cut deep. Her fingers hovered over her assistant's number. Should she call, confess, and beg them to stall the meeting? Should she send her slides and hope someone else could speak in her place? None of it felt right. She had promised herself years ago that she would never be the kind of leader who stumbled into a room with excuses. And yet here she was, trapped on the side of the interstate, with nothing but a dead engine and the slow tick of the clock. Laura pressed her palms against the steering wheel, whispering to no one but herself, "Not today. Please, not today." It was then, just as despair began to seep into resolve, that she heard it, the crunch of gravel beneath tires, the subtle shift in the air as another vehicle slowed behind her. A shadow stretched across the rear window. Laura's breath caught, her pulse quickening as she realized she was no longer alone on the road. Laura's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, her pulse still racing as the sound of tires crunching over gravel grew louder. A truck had pulled up behind her, a Ford pickup, weathered and faded, the kind of vehicle that had seen years of sun and storms. Its paint was no longer glossy, but there was something steady, almost reassuring, in the way it idled patiently behind her stalled BM. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. There was nothing polished about him, nothing that belonged to the fast-moving corporate world Laura inhabited. And yet, the way he carried himself, calm, unhurried, held an authority all its own. Laura's first instinct was caution. Years of city living had taught her to be wary, especially when she was alone. Stranded on the side of an interstate, she reached instinctively for the lock, though the doors were already secured, and watched as he approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. As though he understood she might be on edge, he stopped a few feet from her window, his voice carrying easily above the hum of traffic. "Morning, ma'am. Looks like you're in a bit of trouble. Want me to take a look under the hood?" His accent carried the softness of the Midwest, warm and unpretentious. Laura hesitated, lowering the window only halfway. "It just died on me. I called for a tow, but they said it would take at least an hour." She hated how small her voice sounded, how exposed she felt admitting she was powerless in this moment. The man gave a single nod, his expression neither pitying nor impatient. Name's Daniel Walker. I've spent most of my life working with engines. Could be something simple. Mind if I check? For a moment, she studied him, weighing his words against the reality of her situation. The boardroom clock was ticking louder in her mind than the engines on the freeway. An hour waiting here meant disaster. But there was something in his face, creases at the corners of his eyes that looked like they came from years of smiling, not frowning, that made her unclench her grip on the steering wheel. She unlocked the door, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. "I'm Laura," she said, smoothing her jacket as if it might restore some sense of control. "I'd appreciate any help. I'm already late for a very important meeting." Daniel gave her a small smile, not the kind meant to charm, but the kind that seemed to say, "I understand." He gestured toward the hood. "Let's see what we're working with." Laura pressed the release lever inside the car, and with one practiced motion, he lifted the hood, leaning back quickly as a puff of steam rose into the morning sky. He propped it open, rolled up his sleeves, and leaned in with a focus that seemed an almost second nature. Watching him, Laura felt a strange shift inside herself. This man didn't look like the polished mechanics at the dealership, the ones in crisp uniforms with scanners and diagnostic tools. He looked like someone who had lived inside this kind of work, who understood the language of engines with his hands alone. The scars across his forearms and the roughness of his palms told their own story, one of long days in labor that never made it into glossy resumes. She found herself speaking without meaning to. "You really seem to know what you're doing." Daniel glanced up briefly, offering that same quiet smile. "Been working on engines since I was 14. Guess you could say it's in my blood." There was no arrogance in his tone, only the steady confidence of someone who had spent years with grease beneath his nails and the hum of machinery in his ears. And for the first time that morning, Laura felt something unexpected. Relief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as stranded as she thought. As traffic roared by and the city loomed miles ahead, Laura realized she had placed her morning, and perhaps much more, into the hands of a stranger named Daniel Walker. Daniel leaned deeper into the open hood, sleeves rolled past his elbows, revealing arms lined with small scars and the kind of calluses that come only from years of work. His hands moved with a precision Laura couldn't help but notice. Steady, careful, unhurried. Each turn of the wrench, each adjustment to the hoses and clamps was done as if the machine in front of him weren't just steel and bolts, but something living that demanded respect. Laura stood nearby, the chill of the morning air forgotten, her anxiety shifting into something closer to fascination. She had seen countless mechanics before, in spotless uniforms, armed with electronic scanners and gleaming tools. But Daniel was different. His toolbox was dented, its paint scratched from years of use. Yet every tool inside seemed to have a place, every movement of his hand deliberate. This wasn't guesswork, it was instinct. Occasionally, he would glance up and ask her to start the ignition or to hand him a tool from the back of his truck. His voice remained calm, never hurried, even as the minutes stretched on. Laura found herself following his directions without hesitation, almost surprised by how natural it felt to trust him. Time slipped by, measured not in ticks of the clock, but in the rhythm of his work. The clink of metal, the soft hiss of escaping steam, the low rumble of passing traffic. Nearly 2 hours later, Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead with a rag pulled from his pocket, then leaned back, shoulders relaxing as though he'd just finished a long conversation with an old friend. "All right," he said, lowering the hood with a decisive click. "Give it a try now." Laura slid into the driver's seat, turning the key with a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The engine roared to life, smooth, steady, stronger than it had sounded in weeks. Relief surged through her chest, so sharp it almost felt like laughter. She stepped out quickly, her heels crunching on gravel, gratitude spilling out before she could contain it. "You saved me," she said, voice trembling between exhaustion and awe. "I don't even know how to thank you." She reached for her purse, pulling out her wallet with quick, purposeful hands. "Please let me pay you for your time. At least let me cover something." She held out a stack of bills, the gesture firm, almost pleading. But Daniel shook his head, raising his palm with quiet finality. "No need," he said, his tone gentle but resolute. "I'm just glad I could help." Laura blinked, caught off guard. Few people in her world did anything without expecting something in return. The corporate circles she moved in ran on transactions, favors, money, influence. Yet here was this man who had spent 2 hours on the side of a highway with her, asking for nothing. Her hand faltered, the bills still hovering between them. "But you've saved me hours of chaos. Maybe even my career. It's the least I can do." For the first time, Daniel's expression softened into something almost playful. He glanced at his wristwatch, an old, scratched piece that seemed completely out of place on him, and chuckled. "Well," he admitted, "I haven't had breakfast yet, and I need to pick up my daughter soon. Truth is, I'm a little hungry." Laura paused, her purse still open, when she suddenly remembered the sandwich she had packed for herself that morning. Turkey and avocado on thick artisan bread, wrapped neatly in parchment. She pulled it out, holding it out to him almost shyly. "It's not much," she said, "but it's fresh. Would you take this? At least—" Daniel looked at the sandwich as though it were something far more valuable. He accepted it carefully, almost reverently, and met her gaze with eyes that carried both gratitude and sincerity. "That," he said, "is more than enough." And in that small, ordinary exchange, one car repaired, one sandwich shared, Laura felt the strange certainty that something extraordinary had just begun. Laura stood there for a moment longer, watching as Daniel carefully unwrapped the sandwich, his hands moving with the same quiet precision he had used on the engine. Something about the way he accepted it, as if it were a gift far greater than its humble appearance, touched her deeply. She slipped a business card from her wallet and held it out, her voice soft but deliberate. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, please call me. I work at Harborline Motors." Daniel tucked the card into the pocket of his faded shirt with a polite nod. "You better get moving," he said, gesturing toward her car. "That meeting of yours won't wait forever." His tone wasn't teasing, but it carried a warmth that made Laura smile in spite of her frazzled nerves. She thanked him again, climbed back into her BMW, and merged onto the interstate, glancing once in the rearview mirror. Daniel was standing by his truck, the sandwich in hand, watching until she disappeared into traffic. All through the afternoon, through hurried conversations with her assistant, the rescheduled presentation, and the applause of the board when her strategy finally won approval, her thoughts kept circling back to him, the man with the steady eyes and calloused hands, who had asked for nothing in return but had accepted a sandwich as though it were a feast. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. But as twilight fell and the city lights began to scatter across the skyline outside her apartment window, the question lingered. Who exactly was Daniel Walker? Laura opened her laptop, typing his name into the search bar. The results came back in the thousands. Too common a name, too many scattered trails. She leaned back, frustrated, until a detail flickered in her memory, the license plate of that old Ford pickup. Using connections she had cultivated at the state's Department of Motor Vehicles, contacts she had built over years of talent searches, she traced the plate back to an address in Evanston, a modest suburb north of Chicago. And there it was, Daniel J. Walker. The discovery sent her deeper down the rabbit hole. She dug further, piecing together fragments from professional registries, old press releases, and industry journals. What she found left her breathless. Daniel had once been one of Summit Engineering's brightest minds, a senior mechanical engineer credited with several patents on battery efficiency and cooling systems. His name had appeared in trade magazines, his innovations referenced at conferences. He had been, by every measure, a rising star. And then, just 3 years ago, the trail stopped. His name vanished from company rosters, from technical papers, from the glossy announcements of promotions and awards. At first, she thought perhaps he had been laid off. But a local news article revealed a different truth. Laura leaned closer to the screen as she read the small story tucked in the archives of a community newspaper. Local engineer leaves Summit to care for young daughter after losing wife to cancer. The photo accompanying it was simple but arresting. Daniel, younger, holding a little girl in his arms. His smile was faint but steady, his eyes fixed on the child as though she were the only thing tethering him to the world. The caption identified her as Sophie, then just 5 years old. His wife, Anna, had succumbed to pancreatic cancer after a short, brutal battle. Laura felt her throat tighten as she traced the outline of his face in the grainy picture. Suddenly, the scars on his hands, the weariness behind his smile made sense. He hadn't been a drifter or an idle mechanic. He had been a man who chose his daughter over ambition, love over accolades. In a world where so many chase power and prestige, Daniel had walked away from it all to be a father. As she closed her laptop, Laura sat in silence, the city humming outside her window. She had spent her career finding talent, matching people with opportunities. But something about this discovery felt different. Daniel wasn't just another resume. He was a reminder of what it meant to sacrifice, to love, to persevere. And though she couldn't explain why, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The next morning, Laura found herself driving north toward Evanston. The address she had jotted down the night before sat on the passenger seat beside her. She told herself it was professional curiosity, that Harborline Motors desperately needed someone of Daniel's caliber. But she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something about the man lingered with her, the quiet dignity, the way he had turned down money and accepted only a sandwich with gratitude. She wanted to understand him, not as a resume, but as a person. Oakwood Gardens wasn't the kind of place Laura usually found herself in. Modest brick buildings lined the street, with bicycles chained to railings and laundry fluttering faintly in the breeze from narrow balconies. She parked and took a breath, feeling a twinge of self-consciousness as she stepped out in her tailored blazer and polished shoes. For a woman who spent her days in gleaming corporate towers, the contrast was stark. When she knocked, the door opened to reveal a glimpse of a simple but well-kept apartment. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of engineering manuals and children's stories. On the small kitchen table, a math workbook lay open beside a glass of orange juice, and there was Daniel, bent slightly over his daughter's shoulder, pointing out numbers with a patience that softened his features. The girl looked up first. She couldn't have been more than 8, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, someone's at the door." Daniel turned, surprise flashing across his face as he saw Laura standing there. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice roughened with disbelief. "Laura, please," she corrected gently, offering a smile that she hoped bridged the sudden awkwardness. Her gaze shifted to the girl, who had hopped down from her chair and was studying her boldly. "And who is this?" "I'm Sophie," the child announced proudly, her voice bright. "Daddy can fix anything. He fixed a car before my mom went to heaven. He can fix anything." Laura knelt so her eyes were level with Sophie's. "I believe that," she said softly. The words carried more weight than she expected. She rose again, turning to Daniel, who now stood with his arms folded, wary but not unkind. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced," she began. "But after yesterday and after learning more about you, I couldn't let it go. You were a senior engineer at Summit. You hold patents that people in my company still talk about, and then you disappeared." Daniel's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. "I know," Laura said quickly, "and I know why. I read about Anna, about Sophie. I understand why you left. But Daniel, the world still needs what you can do. Harborline needs it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We've launched a flexible work initiative, remote options, shorter core hours, room for family priorities. It was designed for people exactly in your situation. You wouldn't have to choose between being a father and being an engineer." For the first time, his guarded expression flickered. She had touched something, though whether it was interest or pain, she couldn't tell. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean you'd get to build cars again?" Daniel looked down at her, then back at Laura. Silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of a refrigerator and the faint laughter of children playing outside. Finally, he said quietly, "I walked away from that world for a reason. I won't put Sophie second." "You won't have to," Laura replied, her voice steady, almost pleading. "That's the point. You'd be showing her not just what you can build, but what second chances look like." Daniel stood in the doorway long after Laura had finished speaking, his broad frame filling the narrow hall. His arms were still crossed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a conflict she couldn't quite name. I appreciate what you're saying, he began slowly, but I left that world for a reason. The deadlines, the travel, the pressure, it doesn't leave much room for being a father. Sophie is my priority. She always will be. Laura nodded, her voice soft but firm. That's exactly why I came. Daniel, we built this program for people like you, parents who can't afford to trade family for career. 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, core hours that end before school lets out, and time off when you need it without penalty. You wouldn't be sacrificing Sophie for Harborline. You'd be teaching her that life doesn't end with loss. It can begin again. His jaw tightened and he looked away, staring at the floor as if the worn carpet might offer an easier answer than she did. Sophie, who had been listening intently, tilted her head up at him. Daddy, she said, tugging at his hand, I think you should try. You always look happiest when you're talking about engines, and I want to see you happy again. The words landed heavier than Laura could have managed with all her practiced persuasion. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, there was no hiding the emotion there. He crouched down so he was level with his daughter. Sophie, you know, things might change. I'd have to work more. You would have to stay with Mrs. Garcia after school some days. Are you sure that's what you want? The little girl nodded with the certainty only children can carry. You fixed her car yesterday. You can fix anything. Maybe this will fix us too. Daniel let out a breath that sounded almost like surrender, almost like relief. He rose and looked at Laura again. I won't make promises I can't keep, but I'll hear them out. One interview. That's as far as I'll go. Laura's smile broke across her face, not triumphant, but warm, filled with genuine gratitude. That's all I ask. Tomorrow morning I'll send you the details. You don't have to decide anything until you're ready. For the first time since she arrived, Daniel's expression softened. He extended his hand, rough and scarred, the same hand that had brought her car back to life. She took it without hesitation. And for a moment, there was no boardroom, no deadlines, only two people standing in a modest apartment, bound by the possibility of something new. As she left, Sophie leaned out the doorway, waving with a grin. Good luck, Miss Laura. Daddy's the smartest engineer in the world. Laura laughed, the sound echoing down the stairwell, and thought to herself that maybe, just maybe, the little girl was right. The following morning, Daniel stood outside the glass and steel headquarters of Harborline Motors, his reflection staring back at him in the polished surface. He tugged at the knot of a borrowed tie, the fabric stiff against his throat, and drew in a slow breath. 3 years had passed since he'd walked away from this world. In those years, he had patched leaky sinks, fixed neighbors' cars, done odd jobs to keep Sophie clothed and fed. But here, on the threshold of the corporate skyline, he felt like an imposter in the only suit he owned. Inside, Laura was waiting. She greeted him with that same calm warmth she'd carried into his apartment, her presence softening the edges of his nerves. Ready? She asked quietly. As I'll ever be, he muttered, though his chest was pounding. She led him into a conference room where 4 executives sat around a long table, 2 project managers, the chief technology officer, and Harborline's head of engineering. The air was thick with the kind of formality Daniel had nearly forgotten. He shook their hands, his grip firm, then settled into the chair across from them. The questions began predictably, his past roles at Summit, his patents, his years of hands-on work. At first, his answers were clipped, cautious, as though he were testing the waters. But as the conversation shifted to engines, to systems and solutions, something inside him loosened. The nervous father in the suit began to fade, replaced by the engineer who had once stayed up until dawn, sketching designs on napkins. His voice grew stronger, his eyes brighter. When the CTO leaned forward and asked, "What improvements would you prioritize for the next generation of electric sedans?" Daniel paused only long enough to request a marker. He rose, moved to the whiteboard, and began to draw. Lines, arrows, numbers. His hand flew with the precision of a man who had carried this idea in the back of his mind for years. He outlined a new battery configuration, one designed to increase efficiency while reducing overheating, a balance that had eluded manufacturers for months. The room fell silent as he explained the mechanics, his voice low and certain, punctuated only by the squeak of the marker. When he stepped back, the board was filled with diagrams. His sleeves rolled past his elbows, his face lit with the quiet fire of someone speaking his true language. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the head of engineering leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. "You developed this on your own?" Daniel nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Mostly as a thought experiment. I still keep up with the journals. Sometimes I work on ideas after Sophie goes to bed." The CTO exchanged a glance with Laura, who sat at the edge of the room, her lips curved in the faintest smile. The tone of the meeting shifted instantly from evaluation to collaboration. They asked questions not as skeptics, but as colleagues. Daniel found himself in a spirited discussion about timelines and production challenges. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was alive. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. As he stood, the CTO shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Walker, we still have candidates to interview. But I'll be honest, this is the kind of breakthrough thinking Harborline needs. You'll be hearing from us very soon." Laura walked him back to the lobby, her expression radiant with quiet triumph. "I told you," she said softly. "You belong here." Daniel exhaled, his pulse still thrumming. But in his chest bloomed something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That evening, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table in his Evanston apartment, the remnants of dinner pushed aside to make room for Sophie's coloring books and his own restless thoughts. The whiteboard sketches from Harborline still echoed in his mind, the energy in the room, the way the engineers leaned forward as if he had given them something they had been waiting months to hear. For the first time in years, he had felt like himself again. Yet, as he looked across the table at his daughter, bent over her crayons, the weight of the decision pressed hard against his chest. "Sophie," he began carefully, "they offered me a job today, a big one. I'd be working on cars again, real projects with a whole team." She looked up instantly, her eyes bright. "Like the engines you used to talk about? The ones you said could go farther and faster?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly like that, but it would mean I'd be gone more some days. You might have to stay with Mrs. Garcia after school or eat dinner without me if I'm running late. Things would change." Sophie set down her crayon, her small fingers fidgeting with the edge of the paper. "Daddy, do you like it?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I do," he admitted softly. "When I was in that room today, I felt alive again. Like I wasn't just fixing things to get by, but building something that mattered." Sophie nodded with the simple wisdom only a child could carry. "Then you should do it. I want you to be happy. Mommy would too." Her words struck him deeper than any contract or salary ever could. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Are you sure? It'll mean changes for you too." She grinned, her missing front tooth giving her smile a lopsided charm. "I'll be fine. We'll still have pancakes on Saturdays. That's enough for me." Daniel laughed, the sound breaking the heaviness in the room. For the first time, the decision felt less like a burden and more like a gift. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, he opened his laptop and typed a simple email. "I accept the offer." His finger hovered for a long moment before pressing send. When the message flew off into the quiet night, he leaned back, exhaling a breath that carried 3 years of hesitation. The following week, Daniel stepped into Harborline as an employee. The title on his badge read Senior Engineer. But what mattered more was the look in Sophie's eyes when he showed it to her, the way she introduced him at school with pride. "My dad, the car builder." And Laura, she was there at every step, not only as the executive who had pulled him back into the industry, but as a steady presence. At first, their conversations stayed within the lines of work, timelines, staffing, technical briefs, yet slowly those lines blurred. Coffee breaks turned into quiet talks about family, about what it meant to balance ambition with love. She shared stories of her own sacrifices, the nights she'd wondered if success was worth the loneliness. Daniel found himself looking forward to those moments more than he expected. There was a gentleness in Laura he hadn't noticed on the highway that morning, hidden beneath the sharp edges of her corporate armor. And with each passing day, She became less of a colleague and more of something he couldn't yet name, an ally, a friend, perhaps even the beginning of something more. Months passed, and what began as cautious steps back into the world of engineering soon turned into a stride Daniel never thought he would take again. Harborline Motors had placed him at the helm of its most ambitious project, the development of a new electric sedan. Long nights of sketches and calculations became mornings of testing, refining, and leading a team that quickly grew to respect him. The battery design he had once drawn on a whiteboard now powered a prototype, one that outperformed expectations and stunned even the harshest critics in the industry. The day of the launch was unlike anything Daniel had experienced before. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward with sharpened pencils, and industry leaders murmured in approval as Harborline unveiled the sedan with its breakthrough battery system. Applause filled the air, but what stayed with him wasn't the headlines or the accolades. It was Sophie's face in the front row, beaming with pride, her little hands clapping louder than anyone else's. When she whispered afterward, "Daddy, you did it," Daniel felt the weight of 3 difficult years lift from his shoulders. That success brought other changes too. With his first bonus, Daniel moved Sophie into a new home, a modest but spacious house in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a school she adored. She finally had the purple bedroom she had dreamed about, complete with shelves for her books and a window that caught the morning light. On moving day, Laura arrived with boxes of her own, not of belongings, but of food, decorations, and laughter. She insisted on cooking their first dinner in the new kitchen, filling the house with the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt the comfort of a home that hummed with warmth rather than silence. Laura's presence became a steady part of their days. At first, it was practical: meetings, project deadlines, the push to keep Harborline ahead of competitors. But outside the office, she slipped seamlessly into Sophie's world, helping with school projects, cheering at soccer games, teaching her how to braid her hair. Sophie adored her, and Daniel often caught himself watching the two of them together, a bittersweet ache swelling in his chest. He saw in Laura's gentle encouragement the echoes of Anna. And yet there was something wholly new too, something that made the apartment's old emptiness feel like a life he had left behind. Their evenings on the porch of the new house became a quiet ritual. After Sophie was tucked into bed, Laura would often linger, sharing a glass of wine, while Daniel recounted the small victories and frustrations of the day. They laughed easily, but sometimes their conversations deepened, touching on loss, on resilience, on what it meant to start again. In those moments, Daniel felt a closeness that went beyond friendship, a bond built not just on gratitude or work, but on trust and shared understanding. He didn't call it love, not yet, but as Sophie's laughter rang through the new house and Lyra's hand brushed against his on the porch rail, Daniel began to believe in something he had almost given up on: a future not defined by what he had lost, but by what he was slowly, quietly building again. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of Chicago's finest hotel shimmered with light as Harborline Motors celebrated its most successful year in decades. At the center of it all stood Daniel Walker, no longer the man in worn jeans on the side of the highway, but Harborline's director of electric engineering, the mind behind a battery design that had set new standards across the industry. His name was spoken with respect, his innovations applauded by peers and competitors alike. Yet when he looked out across the sea of black suits and sequined gowns, what anchored him was not the recognition, but the two faces that mattered most. Laura stood beside him, elegant in a deep navy dress, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, as if to remind him she was there. Sophie, now 9, twirled proudly in her own dress, her hair curled into soft waves that made her look older than she was. She beamed up at her father when the CEO called his name from the stage. "Daddy, that's you," she whispered, eyes wide with pride as Daniel stepped forward to accept the award, the applause echoing through the ballroom. He caught sight of Laura in the crowd. She wasn't just smiling, she was radiant. Her pride mingled with something gentler, deeper, as though she felt his victory as her own. And in that moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't just about engines or patents or even redemption. This was about the people who had walked beside him, who had helped him believe again. The next morning was quiet in comparison. Sunlight filtered into the kitchen of their Evanston home, the air warm with the smell of butter sizzling on a pan. Daniel stood at the stove flipping pancakes. Sophie at the table, arranging plates with careful precision, and Laura slicing fruit with the ease of someone who belonged there. "Can we make sandwiches too?" Sophie asked between bursts of laughter. "Because sandwiches are kind of our family's lucky charm." Daniel paused, spatula in hand, and glanced at Laura. Their eyes met across the small kitchen, and they both smiled, remembering the day a broken-down BM and a simple turkey sandwich had brought them together. "You're right, sunshine," he said, setting another pancake onto the growing stack. "Sandwiches did change everything." Laura leaned against the counter, her voice playful but warm. "Who knew a sandwich could build a career, save a company, and make a family?" Sophie giggled, her legs swinging under the chair. "Then we should make them every week." Daniel laughed, pulling her into a hug as she hopped down from her chair. He looked at Laura, who had moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. In her eyes, he saw not just admiration but partnership, the kind that extended beyond boardrooms and deadlines into kitchens and quiet mornings. He realized then that the life he thought had ended with Anna's passing had in truth only been waiting for this second chance. A chance wrapped not in grand gestures but in small acts of kindness. A man stopping on the highway, a woman offering her trust, a child reminding them both of joy. As they sat down together, pancakes steaming, fruit glistening in the morning light, Daniel felt it settle in his chest. The certainty that he had found not just his place in the world again, but his home. And it had all begun with nothing more than a sandwich shared between strangers, now remembered by a family. Sometimes it's the smallest gestures that change the entire course of a life. For Daniel, it wasn't the boardroom applause or the title on his badge that mattered most. It was a sandwich shared on the side of the highway, a little girl's laughter filling a new home, and the quiet certainty that family can be found again after loss. What do you see as the core message in this story of Daniel? The single father who stopped to repair Laura's car for nothing more than a sandwich, only to have his life transformed by her recognition of his hidden talents? Is it perhaps the idea that small acts of kindness, offered without expectation, can ripple outward to create profound change? Not just for the receiver, but for the giver as well? Consider how Daniel's selfless help on the highway stemmed from his own quiet resilience after loss, losing his wife, his career, yet he chose to fix what he could in the world around him. What emotions does that evoke in you? The ache of his solitude, the warmth of his humility, or the hope in rediscovering purpose through another's eyes? How might Laura's persistence in seeking him out reflect our own capacity to notice the overlooked, to see beyond surfaces like worn jeans and scarred hands to the brilliance beneath? If we pause to think, doesn't this tale challenge us to ask, in our rushed lives, who have we passed by without truly seeing? And what miracles might unfold if we offered or accepted a simple gesture like a sandwich? Now, imagine crafting a paragraph of 200, 300 words to share this lesson with an audience. How would you infuse it with emotion, drawing on the story's themes of sacrifice, second chances, and human connection to stir hearts? What vivid details from the narrative could make it resonate deeply, perhaps evoking tears or inspiration? And for the call to action, how might you phrase an invitation to comment on personal experiences of kindness or subscribe for more stories, making it feel genuine and communal? Like, if this moved you, share your own moment of unexpected grace below and join our channel to keep the light of hope alive. Let's reason through this together. What opening sentence would hook the reader, and how would the closing leave them reflective? Your insights could shape a truly powerful piece. What do you think comes next?